Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, welcome back to yet another interview on the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. This is Books Are the Basis, organized by the ISKCON Ministry of Education. And our special guest today is Grace Vraja Krishna Prabhu from Bulgaria. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Thank you, Krishna Prema Rupa Prabhu, for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Vraja Krishna Prabhu was originally born in Bulgaria, and then later on, as a young student in Cape Town in Africa, actually met the devotees and joined the ashram in 1997. And a couple of years later, in 2001, received initiation from His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, and then became very much involved in Cape Town center there. Served for some years as a temple president there, also restarted Food for Life program. And his main focus has always been preaching, book distribution, and university preaching. And so his service was also always based on Prabhupada's books. And since 3 years now, he is living in Bulgaria, his home place, and has started an own preaching center there, also traveling from time to time different places, sharing his realization on Krishna consciousness. So, yeah, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Krishna Prema Rupa Prabhu. I'm very happy for this invitation. And when I saw your questions, I was very satisfied that there will be so much opportunity for deep sharing. So thank you for that.
Yeah, looking forward. No, for us, it's the same questions, but the answers are always different. Everyone has his personal realizations and brings in his own mood and taste of Krishna consciousness. So looking forward to that. Maybe we can start with the first question. We always start with how did you came in touch with Prabhupada's books? Usually, I mean, many of us joined the movement by receiving Prabhupada's books, or at least later on, of course, we started reading Prabhupada's books, and that very much changed our lives. So please share your story.
Before I start sharing my story, I just would like to acknowledge that today is the Tirubhav, the disappearance day of Bhakti Tirtha Swami Maharaj, which is a very special occasion. When we booked this interview, I didn't actually notice that this will be so. But Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj was always a very intense book distributor and a very intense reader of Srila Prabhupada's books. I remember when I used to serve him his lunch, he always wanted me to read him from Prabhupada's books. While he was taking his lunch, he always would hear from Prabhupada's books. So this was his program all the time.
That's wonderful. So let us dedicate this interview to His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. So back to your question, Prabhu. How did I encounter Srila Prabhupada's books? Actually, I encountered the books for the first time. I saw Bhagavad Gita for the first time, and that was at it was a birthday of one of my friends we were soldiers in the army, Bulgarian army. We had some compulsory service. So he invited me come to my birthday. And when I went to his home, I always loved reading. So I looked at his library and I saw the Bhagavad Gita there. And I was completely mesmerized when I picked up the book. And I saw this blue person on the book, on the chariot, and with the horses and Arjuna. And of course, I didn't know who he was. Neither did I know who Arjuna was. But the actual visual expression of the cover of the book was very captivating. So that was my first contact with Srila Prabhupada's books. And it was very brief. I couldn't really delve into the book because there were so many people talking. Everyone wanted attention. After all, it was a birthday. So that was the first encounter. I couldn't read, of course, anything from the book then. But later, I was walking one Sunday afternoon, summertime in Bulgaria, in my hometown, downtown. And there was a gentleman who used to sell books on the main street, where almost like all shopping is happening there in that street. And he used to sell esoteric literature. He used to sell his books up to maybe a few months back. Now he's no longer there. I think he's pretty old now. But I went there, and with my attraction to reading, I went to his store and I saw one book that had the same blue person on the cover. And that book was The Path to Perfection. And I was quite amazed because I saw this blue person sitting on a couch, and behind him there was a window with some swans flying. And I saw this person who was sitting down in a very humble posture in front of him. So the whole picturesque was extremely attractive to me. And immediately I bought the book with all the money I had in my pocket. It was whatever money I had, I all just gave it because I thought this book, I must have it. I remembered the connection with the Bhagavad Gita. And I thought maybe it's the same person, the blue person, let me see. So that's how was my first encounter with Prabhupada's books. It was 1994 in the summer. And it had a time lapse of 3 years before actually I became devotee. And so I would just say that initially when I read The Path to Perfection, I was attracted by the book, but I couldn't understand some of the concepts. Of course, there was a lot of Sanskrit verses and very scholarly presentations, so it was a very new field for me. But the attraction was there. And then I remember some maybe days or weeks later, I went to the same store of this gentleman, and I saw a book with an elderly gentleman who was sitting there, and the book was called Prabhupada. And I decided, no, I have to buy this book. It looks very attractive. I want to know who this Prabhupada was. And I didn't even make the connection that he was the author of the previous book. No connection. I just bought it like that. And when I read a few pages, and I read how Prabhupada struggled in New York to establish the movement, I was so mesmerized by his contribution to the young people of New York that I thought to myself, I want to become like this person. I want to serve to other people like this person. So that was the initial motivation. And later on in South Africa, I got the books from, again, a secondhand store. This time was a secondhand store in Cape Town, Sea Point. And I saw about 7 or 8 books of Prabhupada on one bookshelf. And I bought all of them. Just this time I felt these books very attractive. I remember I had them in Bulgaria, but I don't have them with me. Now I have 7 or 8 in front of me. I bought all of them. And one of them was a part of Srimad Bhagavatam, the Brahma Vimoha Lila. It was this thin Srimad Bhagavatam canto, and the other ones were Life Comes from Life, Coming Back, Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers, Science of Self-Realization, Teaching of Lord Chaitanya. I was loaded completely. And just to conclude this question, I remember very clearly when I read Life Comes from Life. I was alone. I was a student in Cape Town, studying classical music at the University of Cape Town. And reading Life Comes from Life from cover to cover, and I decided this is the truth. For the first time in my life, I felt completely satisfied just by reading one small book. And I decided there and then, at that particular moment, to become a devotee of Krishna. Just reading Life Comes from Life. So that is definitely my favorite book, even up to these days. I translated Lalita Prabhu's book, Rethinking Darwin, which is a BVT book as well in Bulgarian language a few years back, because it had the same scientific basis of explaining God consciousness and Krishna consciousness and leading up to the Vedic knowledge of Srila Prabhupada's books. So I did that humble service years later, but that book was the real, how do we say, crack nut. It just took me to out of my material conceptions to the platform of perceiving Krishna consciousness as the absolute truth. So, and then from there everything flowed.
Thank you for sharing your journey. So from the initial attraction, and then developing this appreciation for Prabhupada, to then finally being completely convinced with life comes from life. That's beautiful. So maybe just we can, in general, speak about the importance. I mean, of course, the story that you share with us in itself shows the power of Prabhupada.
Of course.
Why would you say it's important also for devotees to read daily Srila Prabhupada's books?
I would just say also, to add to the previous point before we jump to the next, that when I read Srila Prabhupada's books, they had such a powerful influence on me that I became vegetarian on the spot. I never smoked, I never took drugs, I never drank even like a regular drink, a little bit to socialize, but I gave it up immediately. Everything that I was doing improperly, as perceived from Prabhupada's books, I immediately gave up on the spot. I haven't met devotees. I actually didn't know there was a movement here. And later on, downtown in Cape Town, I met two devotees on book distribution, Patita Pavan Prabhu and Mukunda Charan Prabhu. I remember them to this day. When they met me, and they were so surprised. This man didn't see any devotees. He didn't know there was a movement. And still these books changed his life so much that I actually started chanting Hare Krishna. I didn't know I have to chant on beats, but I was just repeating the mantra. And I was reading constantly, practically going to the bus. I sit with the book before college. In the breaks between the classes in college, I used to read, and going back, and same like that. It was an amazing, captivating relationship between me and Srila Prabhupada's books that had that powerful influence. And later on, I met the devotees, and I went to the temple. And when I entered the temple in Cape Town, I remember I felt this my home. And since that day, I never missed a day, even while at the university. A day didn't go by without me going to the temple, taking darshan, seeing a few devotees, my friends, and then going home, until the time I actually joined in the movement.
So by the time you came in touch with the devotees, they had not so much work to do anymore, because you were already convinced just by Prabhupada's books.
Exactly, yeah. This is the power of Srila Prabhupada.
Prabhupada himself can make devotees, as we have seen so many times.
Exactly, yes. So to go to your question, why it is actually significant, or why it's important to read Srila Prabhupada's books. I actually got convinced why it's important, because we forget. How we forget? There is so much, we live in an age of information technology, so there is so much influx of information from all sides, and now especially with social media. And the devotees, we are kind of aloof from television. We don't watch television, but we watch and we see social media a lot. So there is so much influx of ideas and concepts. And I realized that when I read Srila Prabhupada books, it keeps me afloat in this bombardment of information that we're living in this age of information, which is complete bombardment from all sides. So Prabhupada's books keep me afloat. And I wrote something here that not to forget the message. Because as we know, the jiva can forget. Even if we have practiced 20 or 30 years, in my case, 20 something, 27, or whatever it is, still we may not forget entirely, but at some point or other, we may get influenced by the bombardment that is out there. So reading Prabhupada's books, it reinforces that relationship with the Vedic knowledge, with the initial contact that we have, this powerful grip of Krishna consciousness that pulled us out of material engagement. It's a very powerful tool for, actually, we could say it's the boat, the Vedic scriptures are the boat that take us on top of the ocean of the material world. And while we are in the world, we are not of this world because of these books. So I read not to forget, and I read also to deepen my understanding of Krishna consciousness, because every time I read Prabhupada's books, after all these years, I always find something new. I always find something new, something surprising, something relevant, something inspiring, something that touches my heart. And I know that Prabhupada's books are alive. So I remember something also. I wrote here a few notes to guide my thought. It's also a sacred time between us and the founder of Acharya, Srila Prabhupada. It's like one-on-one conversation or sharing, like Prabhupada is sitting with you and he's talking to you, his own personal realization. This is very real. It's very real. So not to forget, and also to keep associating with Prabhupada. And perhaps the third point is reading Shastra is purifying. There was that story about one child, his grandfather was telling him to read Bhagavad Gita, and he couldn't understand why should I read it daily again and again. And one day he gave him a vessel that was smoked and told him, go to the river and bring me water with that vessel. But that vessel was actually having holes. So he was bringing the water from the river to the house, but the water would all run. And he would not see the benefit, the initial benefit. I'm trying, but then his grandfather told him, look at the vessel now. It's completely clean from the water you carried. So you actually didn't bring water, but you cleaned the vessel. So reading Prabhupada's books is purifying, definitely.
Beautiful point that just being in touch with that transcendental sound vibration, with that knowledge, is also purifying the heart. No matter how much we can, remember, or just the process itself is also purifying. Yeah. And I like the point also you mentioned about the boat. Actually, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaks about that, how knowledge is like a boat that can cross you over the material ocean. Yeah. And one-to-one, like having a darshan with Prabhupada, just.
Yeah, it's a very intimate expression of Srila Prabhupada. I remember Bhakti Tirtha Swami used to say, I left my heart in the books. He's speaking about his books. And he said, if you want to know my most intimate perception of reality, you read my books. That was Bhakti Tirtha Swami's statement. And I find the same thing is about Srila Prabhupada's books. If we want to know the heart of Prabhupada, we have to read his books again and again. And of course, hear his lectures. I try daily to hear at least one lecture, if possible. One lecture is great. And just hearing Prabhupada's sound vibration, even the things that we hear sometimes, I heard it 1,000 times. But in every lecture, there is always one or two points that you will learn something, or you will be refreshed, or you will get some substance that you could meditate upon in the day. I think you have a question that refers to this little later. So we'll delve into it later.
Yeah, also that the importance of staying in touch with this spiritual energy. You also mentioned how as Jiva is always forgetful, and although we may practice for many years, and yeah, it's good to always be reminded, and certainly reading is a wonderful way to do that. Yeah, of course, the more we absorb in transcendental knowledge, in Srila Prabhupada's books, then the more we start to see the world also with different eyes. Would you like to talk about this? How reading changes our perception of the world?
Yeah, definitely, Prabhu. And I again would like to emphasize that reading actually it could be even more powerful than just sitting and hearing, because reading can absorb your consciousness completely. While sometimes in our modern world, while we hear, we may be doing something else, maybe cooking, maybe driving the car, and your attention goes here and there. It's not, but while you read the book, you cannot cook or you cannot drive your car. So it takes your full attention. So that's why reading of the books is more powerful than even hearing the lecture, which usually we do in, we do a parallel activity a lot of the time. Sometimes in the temples we have a day where no one gives from the temple devotees class, but we have Prabhupada lecture and we sit and we listen. That's different because you can absorb your consciousness. But even more so, reading is even more intimate because it really grabs you and you don't miss anything from the reading if you are focused. So going to the point of Shastra Chakshu, how Shastra changes the perception is very powerful. The first example I taught was this verse from Bhagavad Gita 5:18. Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmana Gavi Hastini Asuni Cheva Svapakecha Pandita Samadarshina. So this is very powerful verse which states that the learned, the humble sage of true knowledge, he sees equally the Brahmana, the elephant, the dog, and the dog eater. So when we become spiritually educated, our perception changes and we start to perceive the soul everywhere. Not only amongst the humans, we don't see only the soul in the humans, but we see it within animals, within plants and trees, etc. So this is definitely Shastra Chakshu. It's a very powerful perception, and I call it a paradigm shift, because before we understood Shastra from that point of view, or before we understood Shastra at all, we had materialistic conception. Here is a human being, here is a cow, here is an elephant, and we have a different treatment for these different creatures because we see, oh, here is a human, he looks like me, therefore I will not eat him. But that that other creature is different from me, therefore I'll eat him. So, Shastra Chakshu is a valid, it's a real paradigm shift. It's not something theoretical, some philosophical gathering of knowledge. It's definitely, it empowers the person to see the world in another way. And I was also thinking about Bhagavad Gita, this continuation of few verses, 2:12, 2:13, and 2:14. How when we read 2:12, for example, we start to see eternity. We start to understand the concept of eternity, which is very powerful. Srila Prabhupada explains in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita. He quotes Ramanujacharya, who gives a very powerful definition of eternity. Eternity means no beginning and no end. Usually in our society, eternity is there was a beginning and there will be no end. But here Prabhupada explains the powerful Acharya's perception on eternity, which is no beginning and no end, and then the real quality of the soul. So understanding eternity then is the foundation of understanding God. And understanding eternity means we understand that the energy that we perceive is eternal. Therefore, it didn't come out of nothing. Therefore, the beginning was something, and that something was a conscious being. You know, so like that, we begin to perceive reality through Shastra from a spiritual point of view. And then the next verse is understanding reincarnation. Prabhupada gave the example how the soul is the same and the body changes from boyhood to youth to old age. And at the time of death, the body changes, the soul continues to exist. So we perceive reincarnation even while we're in this world by seeing the body changing, but the soul remaining the same. So this is again Shastra Chakshu, seeing the soul within the body and seeing the difference between the body and the soul. And then the 214, the practicality is, of course, to learn how to tolerate the constant changes of happiness and distress, the seasons, etc. Krishna taught Arjuna that we need to learn how to tolerate these things if you want to progress spiritually. So whenever we fall into difficulty as devotees, we remember that verse and we say, anyway, it's a test. I have to go through it. I have to tolerate this test. I have to move forward. And after this, at the end of the tunnel, there is light. So that gives us the hope to keep going without being distracted by the actual difficulty that we have endured. So like that, Shastra is definitely giving us the transcendental vision. And with that vision comes the hope, the fresh consciousness, and with that fresh consciousness comes a fresh behavior, a different behavior that is actually an elevated type of behavior that is very much in harmony with reality.
It's interesting how you also mentioned in the beginning that Life Comes from Life was like a book that really, touched you deeply, and you also spoke about the scientific, like Krishna consciousness and the scientific approach, how to see the world in a different way. It seems that this something is very close to your heart, right? To also scientific preaching, to explain people in general an alternative way to look at the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I always take opportunities to discuss with people these scientific points. And he's been always very successful relying on Prabhupada's explanation and on his examples and on his grasp of this matter. And of course, I mentioned the BBT book, Rethinking Darwin by Lalita Prabhu, which is a collaboration of, I believe, was 5 scientists that wrote different articles in different fields of science. And then Lalita Prabhu summarized them and contextualized them in relation to the Vedic knowledge investigating Darwinism and intelligent design. So this book is further empowering us to deal in even more sophisticated circle of people who have gone deeper into science and empowers us to actually deal with them. Of course, Prabhupada's examples are absolutely perfect, but I see that book as an extension of the direction Prabhupada wanted us to go into, so that we could have the truth of Krishna consciousness being established according to time, place, and circumstance. So Srila Prabhupada really wanted his disciples and grand disciples to also write books in the context of his books keeping his philosophical truths and elaborating on them so that we could have this living continuation of truth and share with people.
Mm. So on one hand, it's good to understand the language, like the scientific language, and also have some understanding.
Yeah.
At the same time, Prabhupada's, like arguments are so powerful. If you base your preaching on Prabhupada's statements, you're always on a very strong side.
Exactly. You will always win. I must tell you, one time I spoke with one lecturer at the Cape Town University of molecular biology. It was some time back, and we were holding these student programs there, and we had a private chat with the lecturer, and he was asking me, why are you so convinced in this Krishna consciousness? How do you know it's true and all that? So I started asking him questions on scientific matters, and then knowing Prabhupada's teachings and also rethinking Darwin, I was able to actually put him in the corner, and he said, "Wait, how do you know all these things? How do you know all these things?" Because I was exposing the neo-Darwinistic theories and Darwin's theory and the neo-Darwinism, and going deep into some details, and he was completely amazed. How do you know all these things? And I told him that actually our movement is a scientific movement. Our founder, Acharya, is a scientist, a perfect scientist, and he wanted his disciples, his students, to also scientifically present the teachings. We're not sentimentalists, that's for sure. And he said, I would agree with that. So that means he consented that definitely you cannot play with our movement, you cannot play with fire.
Actually, it just reminds me of His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, Guru Maharaj. He also founded like a foundation. What is the name? IFAST?
Institute for Applied Spiritual Technology.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember Swarup Damodar Maharaj's books, and I am also so much in favor of his teachings. And every time I go to Vrindavan, to Radhakund, I always go into the temple and I pay my dandavats to this great spiritual master. So he came to Cape Town some years ago. We had this interfaith 1999. It was a symposium of the Parliament of World Religions, and Maharaj came there, and we had some association with him. That was the only time I met him, and I'll never forget his presence. His beautiful chanting of kirtan was mesmerizing, and his powerful talks that he gave to the World Parliament of Religion, the people who attended there. So, and of course, the Life Comes from Life. He was one of the Dr. Singh. He was asking the questions that Prabhupada was actually, he was acting in the role of a scientist because he knew how scientists are thinking, and he would provoke Prabhupada to speak Life Comes from Life. So you can see how I've been connected with, and by the way, one more thing, Prabhu, on this top point. I was born on 16th of May, 1973. And one of the days, the book, one of the conversations was 15th of May, 1973. 15th of May is actually 16th of May in Europe. 15th of May is in Los Angeles. So at the time they were speaking, I was actually, appearing, getting born in this world. So it's really, I was like so amazed. Yeah. It's Prabhupada's mercy for sure.
Yeah, it obviously was Srila Prabhupada's desire that we present Krishna consciousness in a very attractive and also in a scientific way. And these great disciples of Srila Prabhupada, Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj, they were very much involved in that service, presenting Krishna consciousness in a way that people will appreciate it. Thank you for sharing that. Now, you already mentioned how when you read Srila Prabhupada's books, you always feel that they are so alive. The books are so much alive, and you always find something new in reading Prabhupada's books. and also how you feel reading Prabhupada's book is like having a one-to-one, like a darshan with Prabhupada. And actually, there is a statement Prabhupada says that the instruction given in my books should be taken as personal instructions. And that's a powerful statement, like that when we read Prabhupada's books and he makes some points, we can take it as personal. This is like, I'm the reader, it's meant for me. And that's so beautiful. So maybe you like to share some thoughts and realizations on how Prabhupada is present in his books, and maybe also can give us some advice. What is the proper attitude? What is the proper mood to be able to experience Prabhupada in his books?
When I read Srila Prabhupada's books, I actually forget that the world exists. I get so absorbed in them. And I remember as even from day one, it was like that. And to this day, it continuously has the same effect in me. So how I understood Srila Prabhupada's books to be a personal expression to myself, as you said, is that I know Prabhupada wanted and he wants and he will want that we spread his Krishna consciousness all over the world, every town and every village. He was the Senapati Bhakta empowered ambassador of Krishna, of Lord Chaitanya, who is Krishna himself in the mood of devotee. And Prabhupada actually did this unthinkable feat of spreading Krishna consciousness all over the world. His books are translated in all major languages, and he wants his movement to expand. So I took it personally upon myself, despite my imperfections, to keep pushing in that direction. So from day one, as we say in English, I started preaching, and somehow or other, this 27 years, I believe, I never stopped, and I prayed to never stop. And there was that statement Prabhupada says, "I will die with my boots on." So this is what I took primarily from Prabhupada's books, and that our understanding of Prabhupada's books is expressed in sharing the knowledge and actually making devotees and helping people becoming devotees of Krishna. So this is what I took as the culmination of his books. And of course, Krishna says, if you help my devotees understand this message, you are very dear to me and you come to me, and all these things are there. So we do our basic sadhana. This is the foundation that was given to us, so that we stand on firm foundation. And then the next thing is, how do I reach to as many people as possible in as sensitive and a well-tailored way to actually be successful? Because it's all about tailoring the approach to the time, place, and circumstance. One fits all doesn't work. So we have to actually know the person in front of us or the group of people that we're dealing with, contextualize everything, and strongly present Krishna consciousness without being perceived as harsh or narrow-minded. Be strong, but at the same time be very loving and sensitive to people's perceptions, so that we present it in a way that it doesn't change the message, but at the same time it doesn't offend, it doesn't denigrate people. Yeah.
So that mood and mission of Srila Prabhupada, that desire to help, we have heard from other speakers how they felt like Srila Prabhupada's compassion is so clearly, experienced through reading his books, how Prabhupada had such a urge, such a desire to help. So that's what you mainly kind of adopted from Prabhupada through his books. Yeah.
Yeah, is Prabhupada's primary quality, if someone asks me what is his foundational quality, is compassion. And that compassion is the most powerful weapon, in inverted commas, weapon, to touch another person's heart. We may be the greatest scholars, the greatest professors of knowledge. If they don't feel that we love them, the people, that we care about them, that we are friendly, that we are expressing our goodness, genuine goodness towards them, they will not resonate with us. But if they feel that compassion, that concern, that affection is probably the condensed one word that condenses all that. If they feel that affection, then all the walls, ice walls between us and them become melted. That affection is like a sun, is like the power, the warmth and the light of the sun. So the light of the Bhagavata, we all as devotees, as servants of Prabhupada, we all represent his light and his warmth. And that's the foundational quality of Srila Prabhupada. And the secondary is the knowledge. Yeah.
Now, of course, the reason why we have these interviews is because there was an impression that devotees may not read so often, or that we all could read more. I mean, including myself, everyone, we could spend more time with reading. So we want to encourage everyone to read more. What would happen if we would be successful, and all of a sudden we actually can encourage everyone to read Prabhupada's books every day for an hour, for 2 hours. Everyone is absorbed in reading Prabhupada's books. How would that change the Hare Krishna movement? What would you think?
Actually, Prabhupada's books are perfect. And when I read Prabhupada's books, I was completely amazed. I was so moved by these books. And I believe, and actually reading the books made me, reading of the books deeply and realizing what is in them, it moved me to action, to actually surrender and to offer service and to be kind both to people and devotees and to be considerate and sensitive. Definitely there was a transformation of heart. So that definitely is the effect of reading Srila Prabhupada's books, is a transformation of heart that translates into an active offer of service to society at large as well as to devotees. And that is a symptom, if we do that, that we are alive, that we are actually living. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati used to say, if we're not preaching, we're actually dead men walking, so.
So yeah, the effect or the result of reading would be that people, their hearts becomes transformed, and devotees will apply knowledge in a more powerful way, maybe.
Yeah, we will become active in spreading the teachings and also to maintain whatever we already have, so that we're not like the Alexander the Great. We win some territory and behind we lose other territories. So Prabhupada said, don't make me like Alexander the Great. So we have to constantly push forward. And Bhaktirtha Maharaj used to say, we're a movement. That means we have to move, constantly expand. And he gave this example. Sorry. If we sit in one place and if someone catches your hand and he pulls you towards him, you very easily go this way to go towards that person because you're standing. If you are walking and someone catches your hand and pulls you towards him, it will be very difficult for him to get you towards him because you're walking. But if you're running, he's got no chance to actually pull you. So he used to say movement means we have to move. We should not stand, we should not fall asleep, we're done enough, we spread so much already, we've distributed millions and millions of books, and we opened so many temples. We shouldn't be satisfied with that. We should always push forward, but at the same time manage what we already have successfully, so that we build upon that and we expand.
That nicely expresses, I think, His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj's mood. You also mentioned at the beginning. I mean, Maharaj had such an amazing energy, such an amazing power. And you mentioned how he was very enthusiastically distributing books and also reading Prabhupada's books. Would you like to share more? I mean, you mentioned briefly that you used to read while he was taking lunch. Would you like to share anything about Maharaj and his connection to Prabhupada's books?
Yes. Thank you for asking this question, Prabhu. On this day, on his disappearance day, it's a great remembrance of Maharaj, how connected he was to Prabhupada's books. Actually, he was a person, he's probably one of the most busy devotees I've ever seen in my own experience. There were days that he had about 6 engagements in one day. And that was his regular, not the occasional. And because of that, he was too busy. He practically he ate once a day, and that was the lunch. And during that time, because he didn't have time to read due to the so many engagements, he made his disciples read him during taking prasadam for like half an hour. He would hear, and after that he would ask questions to the disciples. So what stood out for you in what you read for me? And he would discuss a little bit after, he took his lunch for like maybe 5 minutes or so, to see also how we absorb while we are reading Prabhupada's books, his message. And he would appreciate our own realizations. He would want to hear also what his disciples are thinking. So that was his mood. But I know that in the early days, he practically, whenever he got a time, he read Srila Prabhupada's books extensively, besides distributing them extensively. And we can, of course, see this in his own talks and presentations, that he's firmly grounded in the teachings of Srila Prabhupada. He would also write these books called The Reflections of Sacred Teachings. And before presenting these books, he gave them in the form of talk. He would actually, for example, we did Shis Upanishad in Cape Town, in Johannesburg also, in South Africa. He would read a particular verse from the Is Upanishad with the purport, and then he will come and he will give class on it, and you will see when you hear his class and when you read his book later, that actually his class is firmly grounded on what Prabhupada is saying in his purport. So he's just building up on that. And why he did these reflections is because he wanted the devotees to reflect on the sacred teachings. So we read, but we go deeper when we actually reflect on what we've learned. This was his lesson again and again. He used to tell us, if you hear, you remember it, I forgot 5% or something. But if you hear and reflect, you remember 20, 25%. And if you teach it, you remember 50%, or I can't remember exactly the percentages given to that. But the encouragement was to reflect and to write realizations. And then, of course, to teach these realizations to others. And in that way, we remember what we learned, and it becomes ingrained in our consciousness. That was his style of learning, actually.
That's a beautiful point, and maybe that can bring us to the next couple of questions in regard to, because now we spoke about the importance, why it is important to read, but then we can also talk a little bit about how to read, and maybe you would like to share some tips, some of your experiences. So that is a nice point that Marge made, that the importance of reflecting when we read something, but then we also need to go deeper and try to deeply understand. So how do you make sure to have enough time to read, or would you like to share something about your reading habits or schedule, or learn from you?
I have a notebook and I carry it always with me. And whenever I get some free time, I open and I read a page or two. And that's how I read. I don't have a fixed time a day. Some days I read more, some days I read less. But it's very handy these days to have this little notebook. And of course, the notebooks are not connected to internet. And it's like a library that you can just focus your consciousness. So I suggest to the devotees to get a notebook. If they are too busy and having too many engagements, and carry it always with them. It's a small thing, and you have all Prabhupada's books in there. So, and I suggest that it's good to read, not to jump. You know, if you start one book, start it and keep reading until you finish, and then get the other book and read like that. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur also encouraged in some of his writings that we shouldn't read too many books at the same time, but we actually catch one book and systematically study it and go to the end of it, and then we get the other book. Well, of course, sometimes we give talks on, some devotees say, give us a talk on Chaitanya Charitamrita, or can you talk on Mahabharata? So we need to look for particular talk at different books, but of course we don't stop the main reading that we have of a book. At the moment, I'm reading Chaitanya Charitamrita, so I'm going systematically through it. And I'm at Madhya Lila chapter 4, which is actually one of my favorite chapters, because it deals with the Lila of Madhavendra Puri, and how the Lord himself, he wants to become a servant of his devotee because of his surrender and devotion. So like that, systematic reading is the key, and notebook if possible to carry with us. Another advice, it is always good to have perhaps some time in the morning is the best, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes before or after breakfast, to read the books, if most of the devotees are so busy these days. But I'll tell you one thing, that I realized that the social media is a big thief. Social media is a big thief. And if we notice how much time we spend on social media and become conscious of it, we could consciously decrease the time spent on social media and invest some time into reading. We cannot just excuse ourselves, oh, I don't have the time because I'm too busy. If we spend time on social media, because social media is something that isn't foundational. I mean, it's important to know what people think a little bit, and we move on, but we don't have to spend hours and hours on that, getting into chats. And sometimes people, someone attacks the other devotee, and someone says something, and it gets into a fight in public. Different opinions and all that is absolutely unnecessary and waste of time. So stay out of social media as much as possible. These days, I hardly check Facebook or something, maybe 5-10 minutes a day, and I move on. I put some post and I go, because it's a time eater, and I have more time to read like that.
That's a very a valid point. Srila Prabhupada made the comment that gossip will destroy this movement. So it would be interesting to hear from Prabhupada what he would say about Facebook. And
Yeah. He'll probably say, just close your profiles. No, I'm just joking. Maybe not, but he would have definitely warned that one can waste a lot of time there.
obviously, we understand Yukta Vairagya, we cannot use everything in Krishna service.
Yeah.
As we said, it needs to be balanced.
Yeah.
Then some devotees face challenges to read, in the sense of, I mean, we spoke a little bit about time. You mentioned, I mean, if we are honest, there is always some time.
Exactly.
And it's also maybe not so much about the quantity that we read, but more about the quality, and that we do it steadily, right, daily. So everyone can find some time. But sometimes we have maybe a lack in taste, or have other obstacles. Any thoughts on how to get it seems that you always had a taste. You mentioned about the attraction to reading. Some people just don't have that. So how to gain a taste in reading? What would you say?
I would say I use the old maxim: taste comes with eating. You know, so if you keep reading every day, gradually it will become tasty, because there is flavor in Prabhupada's books. It's not that it's just some dry philosophy. There is flavor, and of course, these days a lot of people excuse themselves. Oh, I don't read books. You know, on book distribution, we meet so many people. I don't read books. So this is becoming ingrained in the psychic of modern men and women not to read. But I would say that is, again, some group of people don't read. But there is another group of people who are reading a lot. And I know, because we see the sales of books on Amazon or other platforms, such platforms. It's going fast. So many books have been purchased daily. So people do read. So we cannot excuse ourselves. I don't read books. Reading taste comes with the eating. Prabhupada's books have flavor, and that flavor is very beautiful. And the more we taste it, the more we want to relish. And I had another point that I wanted to share later, but I will just mention because it's in the context, and I can elaborate if we have a little more time later. What I try to do when I read, I call it pearl fishing. So basically, when I read Srila Prabhupada's books, I look for the pearl. And the pearl is the juice, the nectar, that which empowers me in some way. It gives me a vision, it gives me a perception, it gives me knowledge about something that I didn't know before. And I call this a pearl. So when I read, I usually read until I gather a few pearls, you know, like that. And then these pearls become the seeds for my meditation. And I would write the reflections, because every day almost I write something. And in time, I may publish some book, but my target audience is not devotees, it's non-devotees. And I write in a way that they'll understand, in a very simplistic way, reaching at their level of sensitivity and consciousness, and teaching what I understood from Prabhupada's pearls in his purports, putting it into my own words according to time, place, and circumstance. So this is what I do, actually. Almost every day I have this pearl catching.
That's beautiful. It's like an active way of reading, that with an intention to find some pearls or nectar in Prabhupada's books. It's beautiful. Yeah. Maybe the last question that I have before we slowly come to an end is because you mentioned it twice already in our conversation. When we spoke about Shastra Chaksha, you mentioned how it gives you a new vision, hope, and you also mentioned it gives you a different behavior. And then another time also you mentioned the result of reading is actually that the heart is transformed. So obviously reading means that we change, that reading means that we apply the teachings. I often think Prabhupada gave us such wisdom, so much knowledge. If we only would apply everything we know, we would all be saintly people. And of course, we are striving to follow in the footsteps of the great saintly persons. So the question is how to ensure that we are able to apply this knowledge. What any advice how we can
How to practice
that knowledge?
I was thinking exactly about it, Prabhu, and I had some specific realization that I wanted to share, so I kind of prepared it already. Mm-hmm. And the conclusion or the point that I wanted to share with the devotees and with you today is that from reading Srila Prabhupada's books, I understood that there is one principle that is very foundational. And if we understand it and if we apply this principle, we can achieve social transformation. And that principle is the appreciation of the teaching of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu called Achintya Beda Beda Tattva, which means simultaneous oneness and difference. Now, this principle is very practical because it is sometimes Srila Prabhupada explains it is the finding unity within the diversity, or the opposite, finding the diversity within the unity, and in a healthy manner appreciate the diversity within the unity, and within, of course, the appreciate the unity that is within the various diversities that we may be seeing around us. So if we have this foundational principle of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we would be able to become agents of social transformation, because we are people who practically appreciate the good within others, although it may be packaged differently from our traditional views and perceptions. We perceive the good in others, we appreciate it, and based on appreciation of that goodness, most people will open up to the goodness that is within ourselves. And that creates the bridge between one heart and another. Like there is this simple principle also, understand before we want to be understood. That always creates harmony. And our movement, ISKCON movement, Srila Prabhupada's movement, is all about creating harmony. And to that fact, we have the newspaper that was released by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, which was called The Harmonist. Because harmonist means the one who harmonizes all truths. And as we know, there are 4 schools of Siddhanta within the Vedic science. And all these 4 schools were harmonized within the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So this is our practical application of Krishna consciousness. We are harmonists. We are people who create harmony, who see the goodness within the diversity, appreciate the goodness within the diversity, and see the unity within it. Being connected with that unity, being connected with the supreme absolute truth, which we know is God and which we call Krishna within our tradition. But seeing that goodness, that universal goodness, universal principle within different people, different communities or societies, it allows us to appreciate it, and it allows them to appreciate us which creates the harmony. So this is the practical application of Srila Prabhupada's books. Unity within diversity and diversity within unity. Some years ago, there is a story. Prabhupada was in Iran, and he was teaching in morning walk with some of his students. He was, I think, Maitreya Rishi Prabhu was one of them. And Prabhupada was sharing certain ideas about preaching. And one of the devotees said, Prabhupada, when will be the day when all the people will chant Hare Krishna? in other words, even when the Muslim people become Hare Krishnas. And Prabhupada responded, why would they chant Hare Krishna? They can chant Allah, that's the name of God. So Prabhupada was perfect harmonizer. He wasn't a fanatic. And he would encourage people to have their own flavor of devotional practice, and he would appreciate when that is in line with universal principles, but you will also inspire them to uplift themselves and purify themselves in some of the areas that they need to go a bit forward. So in that way, by appreciating the goodness within them, they open up to appreciate the goodness within us, and that creates harmony. So this is the superb application, I would say, of Srila Prabhupada's teachings. Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva.
So through the spiritual vision, we are able to appreciate, and through that appreciation, then this unity can be made in. That's a beautiful point.
Yes.
Nice point. Wonderful. We have explored many points on this topic of reading and studying Prabhupada's books. I always like to give a last chance to the speaker if they have some final concluding words. Sometimes our speakers have said everything. Sometimes they do have. Do you like to say another message?
I would share a few encouraging words with the devotees to actually make it a point to read Srila Prabhupada's books. And even if it's just few pages a day, search for these pearls, or for the nectar, like we say in ISKCON lingo. Look for the nectar, look for these pearls. They're there on every page. And reflect on them, meditate on them, and see how they can be utilized, either in our teaching or either in our own personal application of practicing Krishna consciousness. And that is an adventure. That is a beautiful adventure. Reading Prabhupada's books is, for me, an adventure, because there is always some fresh experience, and it's never stale. And this is Prabhupada's greatness. He always has to say something fresh. It's absolutely astonishing. And this shows the unlimitedness of Krishna. Krishna is unlimited, and his devotee becomes also unlimited in explaining the philosophy in unlimited ways, with unlimited examples that are fresher and fresher without repeating himself. So to the devotees, let us try to reach out to people as much as possible in our own circle of influence. I would conclude with this story by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Once he was giving a talk, and it was a very inspiring talk. And one of the people in the audience, he went to him and he said, Maharaj, your mission has to be opened in every town and village. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur told him, no, my mission has to be opened in every heart. So I leave you with that thought. Thank you, dear devotees.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vraja Krishna Prabhu. It was wonderful to hear from you about this topic. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.